The last time I saw the bag, it was sitting by the front door at 6 in the morning, already zipped. That detail shouldn't matter. A bag by a door is a bag by a door. But I've replayed that image more times than I can count, the way it sat there so perfectly upright, so prepared, like it had been packed the night before by someone who wasn't nervous at all. Someone who had done this many times and knew exactly what to bring. My name is Daniel. I'm 41 years old. I build structural frameworks for commercial buildings, the bones inside walls that nobody ever sees but that hold everything up. I've always found a quiet satisfaction in that. The invisible architecture of things. I was good at my job, and for 11 years I thought I was good at my marriage too. Her name was Claire. She was 38 when it ended. She taught secondary school English, the kind of teacher students remembered years later, the kind who marked essays at the kitchen table with a glass of red wine and a focused silence I used to find beautiful. She had this habit of underlining sentences in books she loved and reading them aloud to me in bed, not because she wanted a discussion, but because she needed to share the weight of something that had moved her. I used to think that was intimacy. A person sharing the thing that moved them. We had 2 children. Mia, 9, and Owen, 6. We lived in a mid-terrace house in Leeds, the kind with a narrow hallway and a kitchen that got the afternoon light. We'd been in that house for 7 years. Long enough that the walls had absorbed the particular sound of our family, Owen's early morning footsteps, Mia's habit of practicing recorder just before dinner, the particular creak of the 3rd stair that I'd never gotten around to fixing. We were, by every visible measure, fine. The girls' trip started 3 years into our life in that house. Claire and her best friend Sasha, they'd known each other since university, began taking a weekend away once or twice a year. Barcelona the first time. Then Edinburgh. Then Amsterdam. I never questioned it. Why would I? She deserved it. Teaching is exhausting. Sasha was good company. The kids and I managed. I'd cook badly, let them watch too much television, and feel a mild, uncomplicated pride at having held things together. The bag by the door that last morning was her 4th trip in 14 months. I came downstairs at 6 to make coffee. She was already dressed, not in her usual jeans and trainers, but in a light gray top I didn't recognize, her hair done in a way she normally reserved for occasions. She was standing in the kitchen checking her phone, and when she looked up there was a half-second where her expression recalibrated. Not guilt. Something more subtle. The adjustment a person makes when they've been inside their own head and suddenly have to surface. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, told me Sasha was picking her up at 5:30. I made coffee. She drank half of hers standing up, looking at her phone. Not anxiously, that's what I keep returning to. She wasn't anxious. She was present in the way someone is present when they're about to do something they've looked forward to for a long time. At 6:28 she picked up the bag, kissed me again, on the mouth this time, quickly, and walked out the front door. I stood in the kitchen holding my mug. The house was quiet. Upstairs, Owen was still asleep. Mia had a school project due Monday that she hadn't started. I poured the rest of Claire's coffee down the sink. Here's what I didn't know yet, the gray top was new. The bag had been packed for 3 days. And Sasha had no idea there was a trip at all. Let me tell you what our life looked like from the inside, because the inside is where it all hid. Weekday mornings had a choreography we'd perfected over years. Claire up first, shower, then waking the kids while I made packed lunches. Owen always resistant, always needing 2 calls before he'd move. Mia already downstairs by the time I'd started on the sandwiches, reading at the kitchen table with the focused expression she'd inherited from her mother. Claire and I would pass each other in the narrow kitchen with the ease of people who'd memorized each other's movements. A hand on a shoulder. The efficient shorthand of a long marriage. Evenings were quieter. Claire marked essays or read. I watched sport or read alongside her. We'd been doing that for years, sitting in companionable silence in the living room, occasionally sharing a sentence from whatever we were reading. Owen would fall asleep quickly, Mia would need reminding twice to turn her light off. It was a good life. I don't say that with bitterness. It was genuinely good. The first thing I noticed, and I want to be precise about this because precision matters, was not a behavior. It was a quality of attention. Claire had always been present with me in the evenings. Not performatively, just naturally, asking about my day, listening in the way she listened to her students, with her full face. Sometime in the autumn of that year, she became slightly elsewhere. Not distant, not cold. Just as if a layer of gauze had been added between us. She was still there, still asking the same questions, but processing the answers from a greater internal distance. I noticed it the way you notice a change in the temperature of a room. Not a sudden cold, just a slow, almost imperceptible drop. I told myself it was the job. Year 10 assessments. The new head of department she didn't get along with. She'd been tired before, this was just tired again. That's the thing about denial, it doesn't feel like denial. It feels like generosity. You're giving your partner the benefit of the doubt. You're not making something out of nothing. You're being reasonable. I was being reasonable for quite a long time. The second thing I noticed was the phone. Claire had never been precious about her phone. We weren't the kind of couple who guarded our devices, not out of an explicit agreement, just out of the organic trust of a long marriage. She'd leave it face up on the kitchen table. I'd occasionally glance at a notification if she wasn't nearby, tell her someone had texted. Normal. That autumn she started leaving it face down. Just that. Face down instead of face up. It's almost absurd when I write it. A phone, turned over. But I filed it away the way you file away something you can't yet name, without knowing you're filing it. The third thing was Sasha. Claire and Sasha spoke regularly, texts, occasional calls, a long lunch once a month. After the Amsterdam trip I'd bumped into Sasha at the supermarket, and I asked her which hotel they'd stayed in because I'd been thinking of taking Claire back there for our anniversary. Sasha had given me this particular look, not shifty, more like she was briefly confused, and said she thought Claire had booked it, she couldn't remember the name. I thought nothing of it. Owen, who was 5 then, said something at dinner one night that I've thought about many times since. Claire had mentioned she was going away again soon, and Owen asked who she was going to visit. She said Sasha, like always. Owen looked at his plate and said, Sasha came here last week. Claire said, I know, love, but we're going on a trip. Owen accepted this immediately, because he was 5 and had no reason not to. I accepted it too, because I was 40 and had every reason not to, but hadn't yet arrived at the place where reasons become necessary. A thread. That's all it was. A thread that didn't match the fabric. I didn't pull it. I tucked it back in and went to bed. The change came in January, and it came through Mia. Mia had always been close to Claire in the specific way of eldest daughters, a closeness made partly of similarity and partly of something more complex, a kind of watchfulness that children develop when they love someone deeply and can sense before they can name. She was 9, and she was sharp in the way her mother was sharp, and she'd started watching Claire in a way that had a question inside it. I noticed this at the dinner table. Claire was telling a story about a student and Mia was listening, but her eyes were doing something different from listening. They were checking. I didn't say anything. You don't interrogate the behavioral signals of a 9-year-old. But I remembered it. In February, Claire announced the next trip. A long weekend in February, Bristol this time, she said. Sasha had found a lovely boutique hotel, she was really looking forward to it. I said, great, sounds fun. That night I lay awake running the intervals in my head. Barcelona. Edinburgh. Amsterdam. Now Bristol. The frequency had been increasing. The first 2 had been a year apart. The last 3 had been 4 to 5 months apart, then 4 months, now 3. I wasn't looking for a pattern. The pattern was just there, in the dark, once I couldn't sleep. The week before she left for Bristol I came home from work early, a meeting cancelled, one of those rare midweek windfalls. The house was empty, kids still at school, Claire still teaching. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table. Her laptop was open, in sleep mode. I want to be honest about what I did next because honesty is the only thing I have left. I moved the trackpad. I told myself I was checking the weather. I told myself it was nothing, I was being paranoid, I just wanted to confirm I was being paranoid so I could stop being paranoid. Her email was open. A browser tab in the background. I looked. I didn't find anything incriminating. What I found was a hotel booking confirmation, Bristol, the right dates, a hotel called the Whitmore. 2 guests. The second guest name field was blank. I stared at that blank field for a long time. 2 guests. Why book for 2 guests if you're traveling with Sasha and Sasha handles her own booking? Unless Sasha wasn't handling her own booking this time. Unless Sasha wasn't coming. That's when the gauze lifted and I started seeing clearly, and I can tell you from experience that clarity is not a relief. Clarity is the moment the anesthetic wears off and you understand that what's coming is going to hurt. I closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it. I went back to my tea. I drank it. I thought about the blank second guest field for the rest of the week. On Friday morning I watched her pack. She was cheerful, easy, telling me about the spa Sasha had booked, asking me to remember Mia had swimming on Saturday. I watched her hands moving, folding clothes, and I thought, she's done this so many times that it doesn't cost her anything. Not even a tremor. She wasn't lying poorly. She wasn't nervous. She had built a version of this that lived comfortably alongside the real version, and she moved between them without friction. That's not desperation. That's architecture. She kissed me at the door. Told me she loved me. I said it back. When her car turned out of the street I stood at the window for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called the Whitmore Hotel in Bristol. A woman answered. I said I was calling to confirm a booking under my wife's name, Claire. I spelled the surname. There was a pause, some keyboard sounds. Yes, we have that booking. Arriving this afternoon, 2 nights, room for 2. Thank you, I said. I hung up. There's a particular shame in what I did next, and I want to name it properly, not to excuse myself, but because the shame was real and it mattered. I hired someone to look. His name was Marcus. A friend of a colleague had used him during a messy business dispute, due diligence, paper trails, that kind of thing. He was mid-50s, ex-police, operated out of an office above a dry cleaner's in Headingley. I met him on a Tuesday while Claire was still in Bristol, told him what I needed. He listened without expression, asked a few precise questions, quoted me a fee, and told me he'd be in touch within 2 weeks. Driving home I felt something I hadn't expected, not relief, not resolve. Guilt. The guilt of investigation. The moment you begin looking for evidence of something, you've already decided you believe it. You've convicted without a trial. And even if you turn out to be right, especially if you turn out to be right, you've still done something that can't be undone. You've become the person who checked. I lived with that for 2 weeks. Claire came back from Bristol on Sunday evening, tanned slightly. How do you get tanned in February in Bristol? And warmed toward me in a way that was almost worse than coldness. She brought wine, she cooked, she put the kids to bed with a patience and tenderness that I watched from the doorway and felt like a kind of devastation. She was happy. The particular happiness of someone who has just had something good. I cleared the dishes. I smiled when required. I went to bed and lay next to her in the dark. She fell asleep quickly. Marcus called me the following Wednesday. He had a name. The name was Joel. He was 43, an architect, there's an irony there I don't quite know what to do with, and he was based in Manchester. He and Claire had met, Marcus believed, at a continuing education conference 18 months ago. He had photographs. Locations. Timestamps. He had a second piece of information that I hadn't been looking for. Joel was not the first. Marcus, being thorough, had gone further back. Before Joel, by about 2 years, there had been someone else. A man named Patrick. That relationship had ended. He wasn't certain of the timeline but suspected it had overlapped with the Bristol trips in the early period, before Joel. 2 years. Then another one. Potentially overlapping. I sat in my car in the car park behind my office and I held that information and I thought about the shape of my marriage and I thought about all the evenings in the living room when I believed what I was experiencing was intimacy. All the mornings in the narrow kitchen. All the time she'd read me a sentence from a book because she needed to share the weight of something that had moved her. The weight she'd been carrying. I just had the wrong idea about what it was. I want to be careful here because this is where things get complicated. When I got home that evening Mia was at the kitchen table, and when she looked up at me there was something in her expression, a small, tight watchfulness, that made me stop. "Are you okay, Dad?" "Course I am, love. Bit tired." She looked at me for a moment longer than necessary, then went back to her homework. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. My daughter was 9 years old and she was watching me the way she'd been watching her mother for months. That meant something. That meant she'd been sensing the change in the temperature too, absorbing it with the antenna children grow when the atmosphere of their home starts shifting, when things aren't wrong enough to name but wrong enough to feel. Children carry the truth of a marriage in their bodies before anyone speaks it aloud. I sat there for a long time. I chose a Sunday. The children were at my mother's. I'd arranged it a week before, told her I needed a day to do some work around the house. She didn't ask questions. My mother has always understood, in the way quiet people understand things, more than she lets on. I waited until Claire had come back from her run, had showered and was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the paper. She was in her weekend ease, the ease that had always made Sunday mornings my favorite time with her. Dressed down, unhurried. Reading something, occasionally making a small sound of interest or displeasure at whatever she was reading. I sat down opposite her. I put 3 photographs on the table. They were Marcus's photographs. The first, Claire and a man outside a restaurant in Manchester, his hand on her lower back. The second, the same man, from a longer distance, watching Claire through the window of a coffee shop. The third, the one that had cost me the most when Marcus sent it through, Claire laughing, fully laughing, head back, the way she laughed at something that had surprised her. She looked more freely happy in that photograph than I had seen her look in years. She looked at the photographs. She didn't speak. I watched her read them, and I want to be precise about what I saw, because this is where the story stops being about me and starts being about her, which is the part that matters most and that I understand least. She didn't cry. Not immediately. She sat very still and the color changed in her face, and for a moment she looked like she was doing a calculation, not of guilt, but of logistics. Of what comes next. Of how much is already known versus how much she might still be able to contain. That calculation, however brief, is something I'll carry for a long time. "How long have you known?" she said finally. Her voice was flat. Not the flatness of shock, the flatness of someone who has already modeled this moment and is now running the script. "A few weeks." "How long has it been happening?" A pause. "Long enough to be a decision." 18 months. "Joel." She flinched slightly at the name. The first involuntary thing. "Yes." "And before Joel?" Another pause. "Longer." That was different. That was already over." "Patrick." The color left her face entirely. "You knew about." "I know about both." She put both hands flat on the table. A steadying gesture. And then she said something I hadn't expected, the first thing that felt entirely unscripted. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Not, "I'm sorry I did it." Not, "I'm sorry you're hurting." The way she was sorry was specifically about my method of discovery. As if the principal injury was the finding out. I understood something then about how she'd been thinking about this. The logic that let a person maintain two lives, it requires a certain reframing of harm. The harm isn't the act, the harm is the exposure. If it never surfaces, it never happened. She hadn't been deceiving me out of cruelty. She'd been protecting something, herself, perhaps, or the structure of the family, or some version of love she genuinely held for both of us. That doesn't make it less devastating. But it changes the shape of the devastation. "I want to know why," I said. She looked at me. It's not what you think." "Tell me what I think." "You think I stopped loving you. You think this was about you not being enough. Wasn't it?" "No." Her voice was steady now. Quiet but steady. You've always been. That's not the problem. The problem is that I don't know how to be only one thing. I never have. And I spent years trying to be. I didn't know what to do with that. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as self-justification, the story a person tells themselves to avoid the rawness of responsibility. But part of me believed it. Because I had watched her. I had watched the quality of her attention and her restlessness and her particular, aching need for intensity, and I had explained all of it to myself as tiredness or the job or the natural leveling off of a long marriage. I had not wanted to see it. That was my part of it. Not my fault. But my part. Mia knew. I was certain of it now. Not the facts, but the shape. The emotional weather. The thing children absorb when love starts having a subterranean current. I asked Claire whether she wanted to stop. She looked out of the kitchen window for a long moment. At the garden, the overgrown patch near the fence that we'd been meaning to sort for 2 summers. "I think," she said carefully, "that I don't know who I am if I stop." That was her answer. That was the truest thing she said all morning. We tried. I want to say that plainly, because the trying was real. 3 months of couples therapy, a therapist named Vera who had the particular skill of making a room feel simultaneously safe and very small. Claire came to every session. She was articulate and honest in ways she hadn't been with me directly, which taught me something about the architecture of intimacy, about how people need a neutral structure to say the true thing. What emerged, across those 3 months, was more complicated than infidelity. There was money I hadn't known about. Not hidden in a malicious way, Claire had maintained a separate account for years, initially from before we married, subsequently topped up in small amounts. Enough to constitute independence. When I asked about it she said, "I always needed to know I could leave." She hadn't been planning to leave. She just needed to know she could. That was the secondary revelation that changed the shape of everything that came before it. The marriage I'd been living in, the one I believed was built on shared foundations, had always had, somewhere inside it, a private exit. She had designed it that way. Not out of deception, but out of some deep, constitutional need that had nothing to do with me. I found this harder to process than the affairs. The affairs I could frame as human failure. The exit fund was planning. Sasha came to see me, alone, 3 weeks after the confrontation. She sat in my living room and she told me she'd known about Joel for 8 months and hadn't said anything because Claire had asked her not to and she'd loved Claire since they were 19. She said it with her eyes very steady, the way people look when they've rehearsed the sentence but mean every word of it. I asked her if she'd covered for her. A pause. "Once," she said. I said she'd been with me when she hadn't. She didn't apologize. She explained. There's a difference, and I understood it better than I wanted to. Mia never asked directly. But 2 months after Claire moved into the flat she'd rented, 6 streets away, so the kids could walk, Mia came into the kitchen on a Saturday morning and said, with careful, meticulous casualness, "Dad, were you unhappy before?" I thought about the honest answer. I thought about the question underneath the question, which wasn't really about me at all. "I thought I was happy," I said. "I think I was missing some information." She considered this. Nodded. Went back to her cereal. She is so much her mother's daughter. The precision of her. The careful way she approaches the thing she actually wants to know. Owen adapted the way young children adapt, faster than you'd believe, or want, or find entirely comforting. He wanted to know if both houses had a television. They did. He asked if he could have a different duvet at each house. He could. He has the duvet with the planets at Claire's and the one with the dinosaurs here. Some days that's the clearest thing I know about my life. The duvet with the planets is there, and the one with the dinosaurs is here. Vera, the therapist, said to me, in our final session, that I would need to decide what story I was going to tell about the marriage. Not for legal or social purposes. For internal ones. Because we live inside the stories we make of things, and the version I chose would shape the next decade of my life more than any practical decision. I've thought about this a lot. The story I keep returning to is not one of betrayal, though betrayal is accurate. It's not one of failure, though failure is in there too. It's the story of two people who loved each other and didn't know how to tell the truth in time. Who built something real and also built it on an assumption, mine, that shared life meant fully shared self, hers, that she could hold the parts of herself that didn't fit the shared life somewhere separate, and that the holding would be sustainable. Neither of us was wrong about everything. That's the part that doesn't resolve. That's the part one carry. Last week I drove past the hotel where Claire and I had our first anniversary dinner. 11 years ago. She'd worn a dark green dress, and she'd read me something from the novel she was reading at the time, a single sentence about how love is not a feeling but a direction, the way a compass doesn't feel north, it just points there. I remember thinking, yes. Exactly. That. I don't know now what she was pointing toward when she read me that sentence. I don't know if it was me, or the idea of us, or something beyond both of us that she was always privately navigating toward, with me in the passenger seat, thinking I was reading the same map. The compass was real. I just didn't know it had more than one north.